All right. Um, Bah, 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 bah. What's up? um, y'all ready for another lecture? Yeah! Y'all ready for this? That's gonna be the second half. Y'all ready for this? Let me hear you. Yeah! I say Java, you say script. Java. Java, script. All right. Uh, let's uh, let's just make sure that Victoria's on the line. Uh, all right. So Victoria, if you could give me a nice good old yup. Sweet. I'm gonna adjust this little bench, and then I'm gonna. That's a pretty big bench. Stool, I guess. I got everything about that sentence wrong. What's up? Oh, get torqued. This is gonna be week 4, day 1. Madness. Absolute madness. Let me make a little file here. Notes.md. Here's a fact. This fact will blow your mind. Doctors hate him. Today is week 4, day 1. You want a cool fact? If you had taken boot camp 2 years ago, right, you would be halfway through boot camp right now. Fun fact. Right now, you're only a third of the way through the 2019 boot camp. So, I don't know. If there's things that you think like, oh, I should have done this 2 years ago. Like, I should have started exercising, or I should have started watching Brooklyn Nine-Nine. I don't know, just things that you really wish you'd started doing 2 years ago. Boot camp would have been halfway through. Actually, I'm wrong. The math there is kind of wrong. If you'd have started boot camp 2 years ago, you would have finished quite a while ago. You wouldn't be halfway through now. Yeah. Although, actually, let's say that there was something that you had started 2 years ago, and you were halfway through right now. Here's a riddle. What would that be? Yeah, university. Unless you're me, then it's 6 years, son. Yeah. All right. Anyways, depression. Haha. Let's go back to let's go back to today's lecture topic. We're gonna be learning about something particularly neat today. Today we're not even programming. No programming, and yet coding. How does that work? Programming, no, but coding, yes. Let's see. I'm gonna make sure that Victoria's on here. Also, please somebody in Vancouver watch because notifications aren't popping up for me. So today, no programming, but coding. How can that be? It may almost be as if coding and programming are not exactly the same thing. What is today's topic? Yeah, HTML and CSS, right? When you say intro to CSS, we'll be doing very little HTML, mostly CSS. But hey, HTML and CSS, and interestingly enough, both of these, fun fact, not programming languages. Right? Not programming languages. What is a programming language? You want to throw out a guess? Just give me an example of a programming language. JavaScript. Wow, nice. Real programming languages have loops. I guess that's one way that you could kind of say it. Right? Real programming languages are able to do things more than once. Real programming languages are able to encode logic. Right? If this, then that. We'll be able to have like branching kind of decisions and stuff like that. When you see like languages like JavaScript are fairly general. You can describe all kinds of stuff, and they can be used in all kinds of cases. JavaScript can be used for making stuff on web pages, right? But JavaScript can also be used to control robots, right? Cool. JavaScript is like neat. You can do a lot of cool stuff with it. HTML and CSS, they're both good for a single thing each. HTML, good for describing websites. Right? CSS, good for styling. Can you launch a rocket with HTML? No, you can't. You shouldn't try. Can you control a surgical robot with CSS? Absolutely not. That's not what that language is. Maybe. No. HTML and CSS simply just don't have the constructs that programming languages need to describe like general solutions to problems. We're going to see what this means. I know you've already started playing around with HTML and CSS over the course of just your life. Some of you may have, I don't know, who here knows about GeoCities or Neopets? Has anyone here ever been on Neopets? Cool. Who learned to code on Neopets? None? All right. Some people made little, because you could embed some stuff into your Neopet stuff. If you look up online, it's pretty interesting. There's a whole community learned to code with Neopets. Right? The beginning of my successful coding career on Neopets, how many people got started coding on Neopets? Yeah. No, yeah, I mean, we totally could. Here's the Neopets HTML guide. Beginning of my successful coding career. Y'all took boot camp? Dude, y'all should play Neopets. What are you doing? No. Yeah, so here's Neopets. Neopets was a game. My Neopets is crying because I haven't fed him. How many of you have fed your Neopets in the past couple weeks? They're definitely. You know what? They don't die. They just cry and they're just sad. They actually just wait for you. Caitlin, did I feed my Neopets? I don't know if y'all in Vancouver saw this, but we got poor Legolas realizing, oh no. That moment when you realize you haven't fed your Neopets in a couple years. So anyways, in Neopets, like you didn't change the game. Like you wouldn't be able to actually like code to change the way that things worked, but you could inject some HTML and some CSS. So here is the ever fashionable Neopets webpage. You want to learn how to do stuff with HTML and CSS? I will literally be linking this in the notes. The the Neopets HTML guide. Here's the basics. Right? Lesson 1. Right? All commands are typed within triangular brackets. Right? There you go. Who needs Coursera? Who needs Udacity? Right? Next. Inserting text. You put text within the tags. So we won't be really necessarily working through all this, but like this is whack. Can you imagine if there's like the Neopets machine learning guide? Like, oh wow, just this arcane knowledge that was hidden away. I'm gonna hide that. So I wanted to really right off the bat kind of draw a difference between JavaScript and HTML/CSS. Right. Not gonna be writing any JavaScript today. At all, likely. What we're going to do is we're going to do a slightly deep dive into CSS and into how HTML works. I'm going to try and make this fairly interactive. Choose your own adventure. Reader beware. You choose the scare. Yeah, so we're going to guide it along together. We're going to start off by just like making a list of what do we know about HTML. Do you know anything about HTML? Well, I mean, here's a quick one. What does the L in HTML stand for? No, it's actually lingo. Yeah, it's language. So we got language. What about the H? The H? Hypertext markup language. Right? We can really dive into each of these words here. Language, a way to communicate between two agents. Neat. Hypertext. All right, so text is boring. Who even reads books anymore? What? Left to right? We'll just, man. Netflix, yeah, exactly. I need a picture. It gives me 1,000 words at a time. Right? Just increasing the throughput for information. I mean, if y'all are still on textbooks, I'm on picture books, man. So, hypertext. Text is pretty boring. Hypertext is text, but to the max. Hypertext is text that has been like souped up and has had more stuff added to it. Hypertext is text. Text that has nitrous, yes. Nitrous. Text that could be images. Whoa. Text that could be images. It's like, I've already made the 1,000 words joke, so I won't make that again. Text that could be images. Text that could be videos. Right? Hold your horses here. Just hold on to your chairs. It could be text that could be other text. What? You look at some text? Let's go to Wikipedia here. Let me look at the route inspection problem on Wikipedia. I'm looking at some Wikipedia article and I'm reading in graph theory, a branch of, and right as I'm starting to continue this sentence, in a branch of mathematics and computer science, I stop and I go, wait a sec. Why is this thing blue? Why is this word blue? And I click on it and it takes me to just a whole bunch of more text. And I'm like, what? This sentence is not just one sentence. It's made up of more things inside of it. And then I go here, I'm like, all right, let's just read about in mathematics graph. Oh, wait a second, why is mathematics blue? Then I follow this and it takes me to yet another thing. I'm never gonna be able to finish an entire sentence because now I'm like mathematics from Greek. All right, let's read about Greece. And then I think we're actually in a loop of, dialects, yeah. Point of this being that this particular document is not a regular text document. And that's crucial for us to wrap our head around, is that this isn't a regular text document in philosophy, right? Like, this document has some responsibilities, right? And it has some particular interpretations. This document is made up of many connected documents and many connected pieces of rich data. And the more I kind of explore the idea of having a format for encoding sort of rich data inside of a text document, the more I realize I'm going to have a specific way of describing that stuff, right? So we'll sort of invent this very quickly for ourselves. If I have a document called music, right, this is my music document, and I say in my music document, music has been around for many decades. Kanye West invented music in 2004, right? And I say, okay, well, this is a document about music, and some of this information people may want to look up extra details about. Specifically, what's one of the many interesting words or compounds of words here in these two sentences? Kanye West, right? So we might say, okay, well, here's an article about Kanye West. Kanye West. Kanye West invented music. I'm gonna do music with a lowercase m. His debut album, I'm gonna give this The Dropout of College. Was a resounding success. So just stuff. And then I might look at this second document here and say, somebody might want to know about music some more. I already have an article about music. Somebody might want to know about The Dropout of College. So I might album Kanye West. I might make myself an extra document for this, and yada, yada, yada. So these are presumably maybe a bunch of different text files. Right? This is music.text, right? Kanye West.text and dropout of college.text. And this is fine, except for the fact that if I'm just reading this one right here, it is not immediately evident to me which of these words I can dive deeper into. It's not obvious. I don't know. I'd have to look at the entire list of pages that exist. Right? And there might be millions of pages. Instead, there has to be something encoded into the actual text. Encoded into the actual text that tells me, hey, if you want to learn more, you can go to this particular page. And here, say we're working together on this project, right? How do I come up with a system that lets me do this? We might argue for a while and then eventually come up with the idea of, okay, well, what if we decide on some symbols. We decide on some symbols that we can wrap around some text. And when users see this, then they know, oh, if I want to, I can go look up more about Kanye West. Right? And we can arbitrarily come up with some symbols. Right? Here I've picked the dollar signs because cash money, right? So, yeah, Kanye, yeah. And then I know that like over here in the Kanye West article, I might also have an article about the dropout of college. So I put some dollar signs around here so whoever's reading this knows that they can make the jump, right? And then it's up to the person who is actually reading this file to do the job of looking up the page. Right? If they're reading here and they see, oh, Kanye West, and it has dollar signs, if I have told them ahead of time of how they should interpret these dollar signs, then they know that they can look up the Kanye West page out of my millions of pages that exist. I want you to see how mechanical this process is. Right? These are text files, right, that have some extra meaning encoded into them. If somebody did not know that that's what the dollar signs mean, they'll just gloss over the dollar signs. Now, I might eventually want to start encoding some more information into this. For example, if I have an article about Kanye West, I might want to have an image of Kanye West. Right? So I might put in the word image, right, and then a URL to an image. Right? So here's a kanye.com/profile.jpg. Right? Here's an image, and this is telling the user who is reading my file right now. Right? I'm again imagining a real person that's just reading these files. And when they get to this where this says image, they might interpret this as, oh, you know what, it's probably time for me now, if I wanted to see this picture, to go here and see the picture. Right? And again, not something that's necessarily part of the text. The text itself, all it says is image http:// ... Right? But it's up to the person who's interpreting this page to put meaning into it and realize, okay, well, what I can do is then go look this up. So this text has been elevated. Right? This text does not just contain like a single dimension of information. Right? It encodes information that the user can act on. Right? Information that the user can follow through on and maybe decide on how it would like to navigate its way through this information. What's also interesting about this kind of markup here is that I might have multiple pieces of information. So here's one, and here's just another one, blah, 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 blah. Some very exciting paragraph. And I might want to let the user know that they can read either of these paragraphs in whatever order they want. Okay? Either of these paragraphs. For example, one of these might be like a short bio about Kanye West written out as actual prose, whereas this one right here might be a table with like a timeline of Kanye West's most important dates in his career or whatever. Right? Both of these are important pieces of information. Right? A user does not necessarily need to read one before they read the other. Right? So I might write some actual information here that says, and I'm going to choose another symbol here. Maybe I'll choose the %sign. Again, completely arbitrarily, and just say, heads up, you can read this, right? Or the next paragraph in whatever order. Right? And now I've given the user, as soon as they start reading this page, I've given them the opportunity to make the choice on how this data should be displayed to them. What should they see first? Again, what we're seeing is this text has been elevated through the purpose of, or through the employment of like special kind of notes that are left inside of the text that are up to the user to interpret. So this whole kind of thing is not unlike what HTML is. Right? HTML is a particular markup language. Right? And what markup is going to mean is exactly what I've been doing here, where I've been adding essentially annotations to existing content. I've been marking up a page to define some meaning in the content. Right? Text on its own does not have meaning. Text on its own is just words. Right? Meaning is, I mean, if we wanted to, like, we could go into a whole, I took a communications class. So Marshall McLuhan, Canadian philosopher and communications expert. Has anyone here studied communications? Oh, neat. All right. Usually there's like a person or two have taken communication. Marshall McLuhan, famous for saying, the medium is the message. I'll let you kind of explore what the medium is the message if you want to look that up. But one of the things that you kind of end up studying in communications, and I will butcher this a little bit, is the fact that like content itself on its own has no meaning, right? It's about the vehicle, right? And the vehicle infuses content with meaning. Right? So when you're going on a page, you need to be told, what should I pay attention to? Right? So HTML gives us a grammar for this. Right? HTML gives us a strict set of rules for how we can denote meaning within a page. Right? And that's the angle that I want you personally to approach HTML with. Right? If you look up kind of like lessons for HTML online, you'll find all kinds of different explanations. Sometimes people say HTML gives structure to a web page. Right? Or some people say HTML is the frame of a web page, right? Is like the frame that the whole web page is kind of built around. I'm going to go a little bit more airy here, and I'm going to say HTML gives meaning to content, right? Right? Or the word that I'm going to start using is semantics. Right? Does anyone know what semantics means? Anyone want to Google it real quick? You get 32 Nima points if you Google and say what semantics means. Descriptive. All right. So semantics may mean descriptive. Cool. So when we look up semantic, we end up with a bunch of stuff specifically relating to meaning. Right? What is the meaning of this particular thing? Right? So yes, descriptive. That's a good way to start putting it. Right? I'm going to go specifically of what does this thing mean, i.e. like why should I care? Why should I care about this, and what is this related to? Right? Those are questions that have to do with semantics. So taking myself back to maybe the Kanye West example here, right? We can start drawing kind of a difference between some of the content that's on this like article that is semantics, right? Like that denotes meaning for something, and other content that is actual content, maybe information, right? That we can interpret it like coupled with its semantics. For example, Kanye West.text. This tells us something about what we're looking at. This tells us that we're looking at a particular page that is about Kanye West. Image. This tells me that there's going to be an image, and that I can interpret the following text not as text that should just be seen by the eyes, but as text that should be transformed before it's shown to the end user. You know what I mean, right? I shouldn't, as a user, end up seeing this link on the page. What I should see is an actual image, right, if I wanted to imbue this page with meaning. Whereas things like Kanye West invented music, capital W, respect, this here is information. So all of this stuff can be done in HTML, but we could also totally ignore it. We're going to make a page. This one's going to be called dogs.html. Dogs.html is a text file. Right? Most of the stuff that you're going to be dealing with as a programmer are text files. Just because something says .html at the end of it doesn't make it necessarily an HTML file. Here's something fun. uh, uh, FGHJ, HGFJ, whatever, rename .jpeg. Ho ho ho! Made myself a JPEG. Oh, you know what? Here's one. We're gonna call this Bigfoot.jpg. I got it. Right? Bigfoot.jpg. Oh no! Why am I not seeing anything? Right? Because you can't just make things, right? I need to then fill in Bigfoot.jpg with data that creates a JPEG. Here in dogs.html, I should start filling this in with data that creates an HTML page. If I just try to open this up as it is, so we're going to go copy path, take a look at it. Your browser is very, very forgiving. Right? So your browser, you can think of it as a tool for just looking at HTML pages. Right? That's very much what it's built for. You write up some HTML, and then you open it up, like you open up the file in your browser, and then you see the HTML. By default, any text that I write is just going to show up. Well, just Beethovening it. Right? And already I'm actually noticing something interesting happen. You're just going to zoom into here. So this is what I see on my browser. And this is what I see in the HTML, quote unquote, HTML page that I've written. Right? What is the main difference that I notice? There's no new line, right? My browser's already ignoring particular things, right? And right there is showing me that my browser is going to interpret this page. It won't just show this page as it is. It will interpret it. And it'll interpret it by looking at the semantics that is built into this page. By default, I'm just saying that this is just text. It's just text. And the browser is going to ignore any white space beyond just a single space. Right, so here I have everything sort of on one line, even though I wrote this on multiple lines of my HTML. So I'm actually going to write that down is keep in mind, your browser interprets your HTML. It interprets your HTML. It'll do its best, right? But it's important for you then, if you want something to show up properly, right, on the page, that you write your HTML with the proper meaning, so your browser understands it and then displays it. For example, if this is a page about dogs, what is the most important thing about this page? If this is going to be a page about dogs. Like, what should a user know if they look at this page? It should have dog in the title. It should be evident to the user that this is a page about dogs, right? We might even call that a heading. The H1 denotes the most important piece of information in the document that you're presenting at the moment, right? This is a page about dogs. And when I refresh this page right now, I see that dogs is actually presented to me in a different way than maybe some of the other content. So let me just put some more content here again real quick. Dogs is presented in a way that is bold, and just bigger than the other kind of text on the page. And this is interesting because I'm starting to see stuff that is not actually present on the page, such as the word H1. These angle brackets, they've been ignored and removed. Right? Ignored and removed, at least visually, in terms of showing me the words H1, but in some way those have been encoded into the visual representation of what's going on. Right? So I'm going to say that there's two things going on here. Right? Our final page that's shown on the screen is a product of, for right now, two things. It's a product of meaning, right? It's a product of meaning, of semantics, and it's also a product, Well, I mean, you say if meaning plus information, we're going to bundle that stuff together. It's also a product of style. Okay? Where that meaning and that information, that meaning has been transformed into some immediate visual representation. It is very hard for me to look at this page and ignore the word dogs. It's very hard. Just try it. Look at this page and don't see the word dogs. You can't, right? It's there. So we can harness this power of meaning. We can harness it with HTML through the form of tags. Now, you've seen tags. You've seen all kinds of tags at this point. You're working with A tags. You've worked with P tags, right? ULs, correct? Right? Each of those has a particular meaning to them. For example, like what does a UL tag mean? Right? We're dealing with an unordered list. Right? What does a P tag mean? Cool. All right. Paragraph. Anthony knocking these out. Let's get another one. What does a video tag means? It might be a video. All right. Here's. I'll throw you a slightly tougher one. What does a div mean? A what? A container? A container of what? A division? A division like a schism? Like, are people fighting on my page? Like, is it schism or schism? It's schism? That's what I get for only reading and not having friends to talk with about. Right? A div, it's a container, a division, a schism. Right? What could this mean? I'm trying to be, maybe sort of funny, but also kind of serious. Like, what does division mean? Okay, sure. Thanks for that. When you divide. Okay, of the page that's been isolated. Why has it been isolated? Like bullying? Like what's... Okay, sure. Maybe because we want to make it look prettier than the rest of the page or something, right? Maybe we want to apply some special kind of stuff to that. But again, why? Why do we want to apply special styling to a particular page, a part of the page? Maybe for aesthetic reasons, right? For aesthetic reasons, right? To draw the reader in, right? Maybe we want to apply some specific styling to a section of the page to draw the reader in. Why would we want to draw a reader into a particular part of the page? Because it has particular meaning, right? We might want to draw a user into a particular part of the page because there's particular meaning to be found there. Right? Let's look at, so to draw them to particular meaning. And this is going to give us an issue, right? And we're going to look at this issue in a second. Right? Let me go to Wikipedia. Yeah, we'll just go to Snow Crash, the article for Snow Crash for Wikipedia. Some science fiction novel that I haven't read. I look at this page. Right? I look at this page and there are things that my eyes are drawn to. What kind of things are my eyes drawn to? Maybe the title, right? So we've covered that. We've called it an H1. Right? What other things? What other sections of the page are my eyes drawn to? Maybe the image, right? So that might be covered by an image tag, right? But there is more stuff around the image, right? Specifically, this image is encased in, what you might call a division or a partition of the page. Right, a particular section of the page. Right? And this particular section of the page has meaning. The meaning for this page is that it contains a rundown of this particular article or of this particular book. It contains information such as the cover of the book, the author, the cover artist, the publisher, the media type, the ISBN, right? What is that? The International Standard Book Number. Right? It contains a lot of stuff just squished into one place. Right? And it's a place that I can refer to. I might call this maybe an aside. Right? This is a quick thing that I can refer to on the side. Right? My eyes might also be drawn to this thing on the left. What does this thing on the left contain? Some sort of navigation, right? That's important. This is not just a division that just has random text. This is a division that has navigation. Right? It's important to me that the user sees this and identifies this as something that they can navigate with. Right? So I'm going to go, okay, one of the issues with just saying, container, right, is that we lose meaning. Right? We lose semantics. Right? Specifically, we lose the ability to say stuff like this is for navigation directly inside of the HTML. Right? We lose the ability to say something like this is for information on an aside, right? Or let's say I scroll all the way down, what do I see at the bottom? Generally some kind of footer, right? Again, it's a division in content, right? But it has meaning in it in the fact that this is a footer. There's many reasons for why we might actually want to care about defining the semantics of the content on the page. Right? Can anyone kind of like throw out a guess as to why I'm making such a big deal about this? Yeah, cool. Okay, so it makes it easier to find the content that we're looking for, right? So for example, specifically this navigation has been styled in a particular way that makes it easy to see, and maybe the styling has been able to target navigation. I want to think about this as well. Like, I'm going to go right-click and click on View Page Source. Okay. I am now looking at a page with no styling. I'm looking at a page that my browser has not interpreted. It is just showing you the content. Right? But it is still possible for me to find the information that I need. For example, if I wanted to find what this document is about, I can go H1, and I will find that the first heading is Snow Crash. Right? If I wanted to find some navigation, right, I could look through and I would find, in this case here, they have a div to which they've attached a role for navigation. Right? So they found a way to at least inject some meaning into this div, right, through the use of an attribute. Right? I might go footer. Okay, so Wikipedia is not the best example of this, but I mean, what they've done here is they've done a div, and again, they've added a particular ID to it, or they've added a particular attribute to it to denote that this div is a footer. There are other options other than just using divs on their own. Okay. We're going to look at something called semantic HTML. Semantic HTML is going to be useful for several things. The first one that I want to draw your attention to is how would I be able to use this website, right, if I had like a visual impairment, right? If I wasn't able to see the website, how would I be able to use it? Right? A screen reader. And the thing is, a screen reader is a user, right? A screen reader is a user that needs to interpret this page. Right? How is the screen reader going to tell me, right, because it'll read the page to me, how is it going to tell me how to navigate around the page? Or how is it going to tell me where I can find the header information or where I can find the ISBN? Right? We need to come up with some standardized format that a screen reader can depend on. Right? A format that a screen reader might be able to rely on and say, anytime I'm at a page and I want to immediately tell my user, right, who is using the screen reader, how they can navigate on the page, I need to be able to find the navigation bar. Right? And the navigation bar should have some links in it. If I go to just the straight up HTML of this thing, if there isn't the word navigation on the page, right, there isn't the word navigation on the page, you're going to have a hard time finding the navigation. Is that a question there? Yeah. Yeah. For like headers and navigation and stuff like that? Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, there's plenty of space for so the question for Victoria was like the tags that we have right now, like header, or I was going to show there's like I think there's a navigation. No, I might be slightly wrong about that. There is a footer. Oh, there we go. No, nav element. So HTML has an element called nav, right? Nav is a div. It behaves just like a div, but it has extra meaning embedded into it, right? And nav came out of HTML5, right? So the newest version of HTML added this. So the question for Victoria here was, these tags that we have, are they like set in stone, or is there like room for improvement? Was that what you were asking? Mm-hmm. Um, so the question is it because of things like screen readers and web scrapers that we can't necessarily innovate on HTML, right? I'm going to say that's not necessarily true that we're not innovating on HTML. HTML has lots of stuff being added to it all the time, right? If we look up the HTML standards, right, we'll see that like new standards for HTML get released all the time, right? HTML5 got released a couple years ago, right? So here's HTML5 got released as its original recommendation in 2014, HTML 5.1 in 2016, HTML 5.2 2017. So there's changes happening all the time, right? Where basically it is as a reaction to needing things like screen readers, right? As a reaction to needing things like web scrapers to be more efficient in terms of like Google is built on web scrapers. Right? Google deploys tons of web scrapers that crawl the internet and index all your pages, right? And they need to be able to look at your page, right? Like say we weren't talking about a screen reader, a Google robot, right? A scraper needs to be able to look at your page and understand what it's looking at in order. I'm not going to look up Kanye West because I don't want to see Kanye West news. We're going to go dogs. In order to be able to fill in this kind of information here. Right? Like the Google robots, they need to be able to read your page and extract meaning to be able to show you the proper like links and sublinks, right? So HTML as a standard responds to the necessities that like the industry imposes on it. I don't know if that is that what you were asking? Mm-hmm. Mm. Yeah, so there we're getting a bit into like a domain specific problem. So the question here is, when people want pages to show up on Google, don't they have to do like X and X and Y and whatever, and search engine optimization is what you're referring to, right? The answer is yes, but the reason for that is just because there's so much stuff on the internet, right? So when I look up dogs, right, I'm not immediately going to see my blog about dogs, right? I'm going to see probably Wikipedia because it's the most popular, then Pet Finder because they have a lot of money, right? Then Kijiji, right? Because likely what these companies have done is like they've really understood the way that the Google robots interpret the HTML, and they've structured their HTML to like fit that, right? We can. I want to maybe defer that conversation to the second half, or maybe as like an after lecture conversation, because that's actually really interesting, and there's a lot to go deep in there. What I will say just for now, right, is that in order to make my pages interpretable by multiple users, whether those users are, Nima Boscarino using my webpage, or it's a person using a screen reader, or it's a person who is using some weird, like, they're using one of these to access your webpage, right? They're just like, the person who has this computer still has the right to understand what your web page says, right? They still have the right, right? And it is not fair to that user if what they end up getting is this. Right? That's not fair, right? And as an extension, robots. If we want our robots online to be able to interact properly with web pages, the HTML needs to have some meaning embedded into it, right? So that I'm able to very quickly find the navigation, or there's going to be a tag for the HTML footer tag. Right, so I get to say footer, and then I wrap my stuff in here. Do these things change anything about the way that stuff is displayed on the page? Right. Well, I can go and maybe I'll paste in some code into my dog's HTML right now. I'll do a p tag that says hello. I'll do a footer, right? And then I will also do, we'll just do a couple of these. We'll do a footer, nav, and a div. So here's a nav. Here's a div. Yeah, so we got a footer, a nav, and a div. When I go and load up my page, I'm going to see that those things look identical. They look identical. Okay? They have particular meaning embedded into them, but this meaning isn't being translated into a visual thing just yet. Okay? And there's tons of these tags. Here's another one. This one here is called an aside. Okay? It's called an aside. So I can go up here and refresh again, and I have my aside in there. Again, looks virtually identical, right? But to somebody who looks at the code, right, whether that person looking at the code is a person, a screen reader, or just a web crawling robot, right, words like footer have so much meaning than div, right? So I can find the information that I need. So that's the first thing that I want to point out, is that like you can use divs to contain stuff, absolutely, right? But as you're constructing a page, you may want to ask yourself, what is it that I'm containing? Why is it that I want to draw a user's attention to this? Why is it that I have this content? And wrap it with the appropriate HTML tag. Okay? And this is going to have then effects on how we end up styling this thing. What time is it right now? It's 10:51. We're going to do like a little exercise together that's going to roll us into the second half of the lecture. Right? So in this first half of the lecture, what I really wanted to focus on was semantic HTML. Right? I really wanted to focus on the meaning of writing HTML. Notice I didn't write a bunch of HTML. Right? We just talked about it quite a bit. What we're going to do in the second half of the lecture is talk more about what ends up visually appearing on the page. Right? So we're actually going to write a whole bunch of HTML, and then we're going to write some CSS to style it. Right? I want to set some expectations. The second half of the lecture is not a tutorial on how to do CSS stuff. I will be throwing out some tips and tricks. Right? More than anything, again, I want to focus on like the process that I'm going through, right? And you can kind of take a look at the way that I'm modeling the behavior for like coding this stuff up. Right? If you do have questions about specific CSS stuff, by all means, like stop me and we'll take a look at that. Right? Now, the way that I'm going to be framing the second half of the lecture is that we're going to look at a page and we're going to try to recreate it. Right? And we can recreate any page we want. I'm a genius programmer, evidently. No, we'll pick something that's maybe not too hard so that I don't like mess up too bad. But what I would like from you is a suggestion of maybe 1 or 2 websites that we can take a look at, and over the next half of the lecture, we can clone that web page. We can make our own version of it. Does anybody have websites that you go to regularly? Amazon.com. All right. Yeah? Man. I mean, I could code it. I just have a visceral dislike for Amazon. Well, no, I mean, I just have a visceral dislike for, like, Amazon as a company. Yeah. What's this? Is this a box of soap that I'm sitting on? No, I'm not going to go off on my anti-Amazon talk. Because it's 10:53 and I want to let you have a break. I'll do that at the end of the lecture after I dismiss you. So like Amazon, any other suggestions? So there was Reddit and a suggestion from Victoria, which is omfgdogs.com. All right. omfgdogs.com. Oh, man. All right. So here's Amazon. Here's Reddit. Not a fan of the Reddit redesign, but whatever. Oh, I love it. So, heads up, I'm 100% not doing this. But this is very cute. Sisters in sync, like SYNC. Yeah. Awesome. Sweet. And this has some. Oh, is that a parallax effect there? Very nice. Cool. So these are all different websites. I'm gonna take a look just through these while y'all are on a break. I'll see which of these websites has stuff that like I want to specifically show off to you, and that's related to the Tweeter project that you're working on. And then we'll spend the second half writing the HTML and the CSS to kind of clone a website. Right? Heads up, we won't make it 100% of the way, right? Like, I'm not gonna go like unchained and just like blah. We'll get like 30% of the way, but it'll be kind of interesting. Cool. Cool. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna take a break. Treat yourself. 11 minutes. Let's start up again at 11:07. You know what? I'll give you 11:07. 12 minutes. Um, Yo, what's up? Victoria? I will be on your screen in a second. Alright. How's it going? If I could get... Oh, we got a yo from Terrence. Nice. So, I did the opposite of what I was supposed to do. I did not look at any of the websites. Instead, Anthony here asked a very insightful question. If I'll talk about what Mastodon is eventually, but if y'all want to join me on my own personal Twitter, it's yvr.social. Good domain name, am I right? yvr.social. I could host parties. I think I'm gonna squat on this and sell it eventually, but yeah. So yeah, exactly. I seize the means of production of domain names. That's what I do. So what we were gonna do is we were gonna make this page today. Nope. I will save that though. I'm bookmarked. I think what we're gonna do is we're gonna go ahead and make the Reddit homepage. Yeah, just because there's some pretty interesting kind of things going on here in terms of layout. We've got a big old navigation bar across the top. We've got this trending today thing. We've got posts that go vertically. And then next to it, we have another column that has some other stuff, including the ever useful, whatever the heck this is. Thank you, Reddit. That's just a space. Let's go see what the space is. Inspect. And then we can start inspecting maybe the what this particular thing is. Luckily for me, Reddit, the developers of Reddit, the very kind developers of Reddit, have chosen to write their code with, as you're going to see, very semantic HTML. This HTML is going to have so much meaning. In fact, even stripped of its styling, I challenge you to, this might not even be a challenge. It might be very easy. Identify what this code is supposed to be. So here is a div, and it's the particular div that we were looking at. This one right here. As you can see, it's highlighted. Right? And of course, this is the div with the class avkljzx. Breath. zu3brq, right? Like, this is not very semantic HTML. And also, this code is probably not written by a human being. This code was written by one of those Reddit drones. No, it was written by probably like a program that might have looked at some code that had been written and churned it and maybe squished it to make it smaller to transfer over a network. Maybe messed up some of the code to make it difficult to read or understand. Maybe some of this stuff is generated sort of randomly based on where you are or whatever. At the end of the day, there's probably no human who wrote _33ER. The stuff might be generated off something. So I could, if I wanted to start working on this page, take a look at the HTML, but that's going to be cheating. Instead, what we're going to do is we're going to do this like real devs. Let me zoom in a little bit. Yes, real devs. I'm going to take a screenshot. Screenshot right here. I'm going to capture. Boop. I'm going to show you the first step to building a page with HTML and CSS is going to be to look at the final design. Yeah, stunned. Look at the final design. Look at what the goal is. It is very hard to code if you don't know what your goal is. It's very hard. Right? So as a developer, as a front-end developer, when you're working somewhere, you will receive a design from a designer, likely. You'll be given something that looks maybe roughly like this. Maybe like this in different stages, like maybe like this, but with just the forms, but no, as in like no content, but just kind of blank boxes. Right? Maybe this in like different stages, such as like what happens when somebody clicks on this thing over here and all that. I'm going to be just looking at this state right here. And I'll notice that, like, if I want to, can I draw on here? Whoop, I can. How do I make the lines thick? There we go. Whoop-ah. Ooh. That whoa. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start drawing some rectangles. Pages are made up of rectangles. Help me. Let's draw one rectangle up here. Do you want to just, with your fingers, go up there and draw a rectangle? This is your chance. You could be famous right now. You could be on the Victoria. Cool. So this was the rectangle that was drawn out. Boop. By all means, this is a fine rectangle, if I do say so. Okay, wait. Why can't I draw anymore? There you go. A fine rectangle. Here's another rectangle. Wow. This whole thing, the whole page is one big rectangle. Here's another rectangle. This whole thing up here, rectangle. Make the lines a little less thick. This is quite a bit. Here's another one. This thing right here. Right? Even within these things, I notice even more rectangles. Like over here, there is a rectangle. Right? This whole section right here, another rectangle. Right? There's a small rectangle, right, and a big rectangle down here. There's all these different rectangles that I can draw, and I could do this for days. You can keep going and keep going and keep going. And what you're going to notice is that these rectangles are going to translate to being things like asides, navigation, articles. There's an article tag. Just like how there's a div tag, there's an article tag. That doesn't necessarily do anything, but it tells the user or it tells the reader that this is an article that we're looking at. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start translating each of these things over into code. I'm going to give this name, these names, like the top part here, this is going to be navigation. Right? The center part here, like this is some content. I might have an aside. I'm going to call each of these an article. And I might hunt through the HTML documentation or like the list of tags to find an appropriate name for what this thing is up here. But right now I might just call it a div. And then I'll come up with the proper tag for it. So I'm going to make myself a file. This one's going to, or we'll start with a folder. This one's going to be called Reddit. And we're going to do a new file. I'm going to make a HTML file. This can be called index.html. Convention. Index just means the entry point of your application. Index.html. So in my index.html, I'm going to write the basic structure for an HTML page, which you've seen at this point because you've worked with, what do you call it? With, I got this Tiny app. You did Tiny app with EJS. Okay. So VS Code even gives me like the basic structure for an HTML page. I type out HTML and press enter, and it pops out like this. So the basic structure has a head tag, a body tag nested within an HTML tag. The head is everything that your application, or not your application, but your page thinks about. Everything it thinks about is there. And body is everything it shows. All the content that it's going to show is going to be inside of the body. This is a lie. Like, you will find that the world is a bit more complicated than that. Right? But for right now, that's all we need. Right? As developers are known to do, they've overcomplicated things. So you will discover that things get a little bit weirder. What I'm going to do is I'm going to throw some information in here. For example, there is the nav bar. Right? I said there was going to be a nav. Among other things, I said that there was going to be this like content of this body. I could even honestly open up an angle bracket and just scroll through and eventually find a tag that actually makes sense for what I'm looking at, right? For example, I actually have the main section of content that I want to display, right? And HTML5 offers the main tag. The main tag is just a div, but it encodes meaning that says this is where you'll find the main section of content, right? So I'm going to have this main. I'm going to say that my main is going to be these two things, like this thing and this thing. Like these two kind of main columns. And this stuff up here, right now, I'm just going to call it a div, but I'll probably come up with a better name for it later, right? And I'm going to start off literally by just writing in, this is navigation. This was my trending gallery, right? And in my main, I have two things. I have two kind of sections of columns. One of them is maybe this division that has all of the articles, and the other one is this kind of like aside, right? So I might say that there's a division into which I put a bunch of articles, right? And then there's an aside, right? And there just so happens to be an aside tag, right? And here I'll go information about Reddit. And this on its own is going to get me fairly far, right? Again, it might feel like I'm arbitrarily picking things like nav and div and main, right? But this really comes out of a discussion with myself about what I think these particular things on this page mean. Right? I may get some of this stuff wrong. I may later down the line decide, oh, this shouldn't be a main. That's totally fine. Like I can just switch it later, right? But it's good framing for me as I'm building this to think of it this way. I want you to see what happens now when I take a look at the page. You're gonna go copy path, go look at it, and it looks absolutely nothing like the Reddit homepage. Right? Here's Reddit. Here is our version of Reddit. Doesn't look like much right now. Be careful who you call ugly in high school. This is, yeah. So we're gonna make some changes to this real quick. There's some immediate kind of changes that, or immediate things that maybe need to be addressed. I think one of the main ones is the fact that like the layout of this stuff feels a little weird. For example, I want my popular posts, my articles, and I want this information to be side by side. But at the moment, I have them one on top of the other. Right? So I would like to have these things displayed next to each other. That's what I would like. But when I think really, really hard, and I think about whether this has anything to do with actual content, and whether it has to do with the meaning of the stuff on the page, the answer is going to be a resounding no. Right? Like the content still means the same thing, whether or not it's next to what I'm looking at. Right? That information, the way that this is going to be displayed on the page, right, beyond its general hierarchy of what it falls beneath, right, beyond that, like beyond the fact that like my articles and my information about Reddit need to be somewhere underneath navigation, and that is what I have right now. Navigation and then articles and information about Reddit are under there. That kind of structure is encoded inside the HTML. The more fine-grained visual stuff, for that I'm going to have to tap into CSS. Right? So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to make a file, and this file is going to be called styles.css. Styles.css, and I will be able to start writing a bunch of stuff in here. We will write stuff in here in a minute. I want to link this page up to my index.html. I want you to see that right now when I take a look at the network tools. When I take a look at the network tools, how many requests are happening on this page? How many requests have happened? Please. One request. One request has happened. Right? One request has happened for one single document. Right? This is good because I've only told it to load up the one document. But I might also want to load up some CSS. The CSS, I'm going to write it in a separate file. Right? I could write the CSS inside of the HTML, but then that'll make my HTML file really like messy and big. Right? So instead, I'm going to write it in a separate file. Here's an example. I'm going to say something like the nav is going to have the color green. Right? So CSS has its own syntax. I'm going to say, what am I targeting? And what do I want to do to that target? Right? CSS is built around rules. This is a rule about how you should display this. I will not immediately see that the nav is green. Right? Don't immediately see that because I need to actually link that up inside of the page. This is something that my page thinks about. It thinks about linking some CSS to HTML. So I get to say inside of my head, link rel. Well, rel is going to mean the relationship of the thing that I'm linking. And I'm saying I'm linking a style sheet. Right? And I'm going to say I always get this wrong, so let's see. We'll do it with source, but who knows? We're going to say source. I'm going to write styles.css. We'll just see if this works. If I have done this properly, which I may not have, what I should see is that there should be 2 network requests. Right? I didn't do this properly. Nice. So apparently this isn't how you write a link. So Nima flew too close to the sun. How to link CSS to HTML. There's one more attribute. My life. Link rel style sheet. Oh, it's href. It's not source. Typical href style CSS. So we're just going to try this again and just kind of see if it works. Whoop-pow! 2 things. Navigation has turned green. Right? And the second thing here is there are how many requests? 2. There are 2 requests because there are 2 separate things. Right? My browser is receiving the index HTML, and then as it reads this code here, it goes from top to bottom. It sees, oh, hey, you know what? I also should load up the CSS styles from this link here. Right? If I had ignored this thing, right? So you can comment out in HTML, right? Command / to just do it automatically. If it had ignored it, it wouldn't have loaded it up. But as soon as it loads up some CSS, now it's changed its understanding or its perception of how it's going to present the page. Notice with no CSS that I'm loading up, things look like this. But as soon as I load up some CSS, if my CSS says that the nav should be green, that's what I end up with. Some interesting things happen though, because if I have an HTML like tag, say that says this one has the word Reddit up in the top, I'm going to say that that's the H1 for our page, right? It may not be the case in Reddit, but it's going to be the case for us. Then my navigation is going to have an H1 that says Reddit. That's loud. Reddit. Right? I'm going to notice something curious, and this is something that I've already seen before, which is that the particular word that I put in there as an H1 is styled already. Right? It's green because I said that everything in the nav should be green. Right? So we'll talk about the specific CSS rules and how they actually work in a minute. So somehow it's already green, but regardless of the green, so let's say I get rid of that. Regardless of the green, this is bold and large. Meaning that my browser has applied some styles to this already. It has already applied some styles. And in fact, if I was to right-click and inspect on the word Reddit right now, right, I would find that my H1 already has some, what I'm going to call user agent styles. And user agent styles are styles that are already loaded up by your browser. Right? So your browser already has some opinion on how it's going to display some things. And to be honest, it may or may not be right. Right? You may disagree on the default styles. For example, the font size of an H1 has a 1.5 EM. EM is a standard for size of pixels, of font. But what it also has is notice that it pushes all the other content away. And I never said that this is a thing that should happen. I might wholly disagree with this. If I take a look at the user agent style sheet, I will see that there's a thing called margin being used. Margin block start, margin block end. In fact, as I highlight or hover the H1, I will see that my inspector even shows these orange blocks that live both above and below. Right, so this is margin. Right? There's also a concept called padding. These are both concepts that push some content away from stuff. And we'll explore these sort of in depth in a second. But again, I'm frustrated because I didn't say that this is what should happen. All I said is that this is an H1. Right? So sometimes we don't want the styles that are already built into the browser to ruin the way that I want the page to be displayed. For example, right now, all I want is I want everything inside of the nav to be green. Right? So I got that, but I don't want the margin. So what I'm going to look at is a CSS reset. A CSS reset is a particular tool, or not tool, it's a particular we'll call it it's a CSS file that sets everything to 0. It clears everything that's already baked into the browser as far as styling goes. Meaning that when your browser loads up your page, if you have included a reset, the page will at first tell the browser, forget everything you know about CSS. And the browser will be like, all right, I don't know anything about CSS. And then you can just start from scratch. So here it is. This is an example of a CSS reset. I could go through and I could see, oh, it removes most of the spacing between table cells, right? There's tables in HTML. This one resets the default cursor. This one here defines consistent border, margin, and padding, right? And I can explore to see whether this particular CSS reset that I could either copy and paste into a file. So I could go, here's a new file, reset.css, and just paste it in. And it's 366 lines of just clearing stuff on my page. If I was to then include this as a style sheet in my page, so I'll just call it reset.css, I would find that my page now looks slightly different in terms of the fact that like a lot of the stuff that had been inferred before has been now ignored by the browser. Right? And I could now take a look at the H1 styling and find that not only does my H1 styling have the user agent style sheet, but notice that all of these things are crossed out. So this is the HTML button had gotten this color off of that reset. Or whoops, not that. Let me go further down. We'll go down here. Oh, that's a bad one. Where'd you go? Okay, we'll do this. The H1 by default had a font size of 2EM as given to us by the user agent style sheet. But ever since I brought in the reset, that font size of 2EM is crossed out. Right? And I could find that the font size has actually been set to 100%, whatever 100% means. Right? But the idea being a reset is a file that I can bring in to clear all the preconceived notions of how the browser should display the page. Right? So that's about as much as I'm going to say about resets right now. I want you to go online and look up reset CSS and find that there's many options. Right? There's a ton of them. Right? And I want you to maybe take a bit of time to compare and contrast what the different options are. Like here is a look at CSS resets in 2018. This might be a good article to take a look at. Right? But I'll say that the basic thing that this does, a reset, or you're going to find the word normalize as well. What these do is they'll clear preconceived notions. So now I can start from scratch. Are there any questions about that? Cool. So now that I'm not carrying the baggage that my browser has carried into it with, I can start thinking about how I want to display these particular things. So I'm going to start off with the top of the Reddit page. It stretches all the way across, and it has a background that is white. And the main content, or let's say the entire rest of the HTML page, has this background that is whatever this light gray color is. So I'm going to steal that light gray color. I'm just going to inspect the page and then scroll through until I find something that says something like background color or something like that looks similar. Yeah, it's like you'll notice that there's a ton of colors in here, and it can often be pretty hard to find the culprit. One thing that you can do is install something like ColorZilla. ColorZilla is an eyedrop tool in the sense that once I've installed this extension, so I can add my extension. Once I've added this extension, it puts itself up in the corner of my browser here, and I'm able to do things like ask myself, okay, well, what is this color? I click on ColorZilla, pick color from page, and I pick it. And now it copies it to my clipboard. So I can do things like, I want to say that my whole HTML document should have, my whole HTML document should have the background of that particular color. And now, lo and behold, my page has that color in the background. I wanted to say that my navigation has, again, whatever sort of whitish color this is. Turns out it's perfect white. So I can say that my navigation has the background of that particular color. I've done something weird here. I mean, if I refresh my page, I will see that I now have the white up there for the navigation. But there's something kind of strange about what I've done here. What is it? Yeah. There's nav twice. That's something you're totally allowed to do in CSS. I can declare as many rules, as many overlapping rules as I want. CSS is very forgiving. This might become confusing as a programmer because I want to find all the rules for my nav in one place. So what I can do is say, okay, well, you know what? Let me just make sure that's all done in one place. Right? But I want you to know that like it's totally legal for you to have rule thing, like select a rule, select a rule, select a rule as many times as you want. That's totally fine. See, nothing changed about my code. 1 second. Sorry, Victoria. The question was, I was saying, there's something curious about what's happening with the nav. Anthony said it's left justified. Great. That is absolutely a thing about it, right? Another thing about it, and this is maybe more structural, is that my nav actually stretches across the entire page. This is neat. This is what I kind of, bless you. This is what I expect of a navigation bar. That's what I expect, but it's neat that this kind of just happened by default. Right? So my navigation bar is being displayed in a particular way. I displayed all the way across. Right? But there are going to be other components, right? Other things, such as maybe, let me put in a span. So here is a span block. Right? Span, and I might say, okay, here is my span is going to have a background of red. Right? What I will notice about the span is the span does not stretch all the way. Does not stretch all the way. So if I was to take multiple spans and put them next to each other, right, in code, they display, given enough space, they will display next to each other. Right? But maybe when they're not given enough space, they'll just fall down. Right? Whereas other things like navs, right? Navs, if I have multiple of them, they'll be displayed one on top of the other, on top of the other, on top of the other. Right? And this is curious for several reasons. One of the reasons this is curious is because I have this articles and information about Reddit that I actually want to display next to each other. But if I take a look at what's going on right now, my articles and my information about Reddit both take up the entire thing. And so that's something I'm probably going to have to think about. How do I get this to fall in? What we're looking at here is the difference between display inline or as an inline block. So, go here. There's a thing called the CSS display property. I wanted to show you a very loose example. Heads up, you do not need to know a lot of CSS. Okay? You will find that as soon as you go online and you look up some stuff on CSS, you will be overwhelmed with information. Right? There is a lot. I think the biggest mistake that people make going into CSS, especially going into this week, is thinking that you need to know a lot. You really don't. Right? For example, if I go on here, I find that there are these options: display none, display inline, display block, display inline block. All of these have just so much stuff to read. Like, I don't know what I'm looking at. Hot tip: the only things that you really need to know are display inline block. That's kind of it. So, for example, and I'm gonna hop into the inspector here as I show you something, and then I'll actually write it in CSS. If I'm looking at, let me write this just down here. If I'm looking at these two particular divs here, and I wanted them to be displayed next to each other, one of the things that I can do, and watch me just get this wrong immediately, is say that each of these divs, so this div here and also this div here. So at the moment what I'm doing is I'm selecting, I know I called it a div, but divs and asides are essentially the same thing. This one here, I can go and change its element style to display inline block. And what I've ended up with right now is when I zoom out, they're being displayed next to each other. Right? So if I tell two divs or two asides, or a div and an aside that are next to each other in code, they're siblings in code. If I tell them both to display inline block, right, the browser will ignore its default opinion on how divs or asides should be displayed, which is as kind of like full line elements. It'll ignore that, and instead it'll say, okay, you know what, I'm going to make them only take up as much space as they need to. And so notice when I say that this particular div, articles, if I take off the display inline block, my block now takes up way more space than it needs. It takes up the full horizontal space. But as soon as I say display inline block, it only takes up as much space as it needs. And it leaves room for other stuff to come in. Okay. This is, maybe not the most intuitive thing. Display inline block, I find as a word or as a phrase is very confusing. But CSS is going to be built up of many of these basically like small ways of coercing a page to do what you want it to do, right? To display itself the way that you want it to display. And once you learn some of these, as you look at a particular page that exists, you'll be able to start identifying places where I might need to use these particular tools. So for example, as I'm looking at this, right, and I need these two things to display next to each other, one option might be display inline block. Right? If I need to get these two large sections to display next to each other. Right? That might be one option. Now, what time is it here? Cool, 11:41. Now, we're going to kick things up like a slight notch in terms of, I'm going to start actually writing quite a bit of code. I want you to hold on. This isn't, again, a tutorial on how to write these particular things in CSS. I'll explain things as I kind of go along, but just stop me on the way. I start taking a look at the particular things that are going on in here, such as, for example, this banner here. It has something on the left and something way on the right. Right. It will just say that there's a button that says login, and there's this header here on the right, on the left. So I can go into my nav and say, okay, well, my nav has this H1, and it also has a button, right? And my button's going to say login. Right, that's the thing that it's going to say. And I save this, and I go in and refresh my kind of like Reddit page, and something curious has happened. Now, you've seen this before. What is the issue here? Well, it's not that the button doesn't do anything. I wanted my stuff to be displayed with the word Reddit on the left and login way on the right. But right now I've ended up with one on top and one on the bottom. Right? So this is telling me that evidently something about how my browser interprets the H1 and the button, right, causes it to display them such that at least the H1 is taking up all of the space. In fact, I could go see my H1 right here. My H1 is taking up the entirety of the horizontal space. What have I learned that I can do with this? Right? My button on the other hand is not taking up. See, like what it highlights? It doesn't highlight the entire space. Right? So what have I learned that I can do to make sure that both of these are on the same page, on the same line? So I might change the margin or the padding for the top, but if I was to take a look at, so the margin, which we haven't talked about in depth just yet, the margin would show as like stuff around the H1, right? But more critically, what I'm seeing is that like content, so I'm gonna show you content when you hover over elements, content is gonna be blue, padding is gonna be green. So we haven't talked about padding yet. Border is gonna be this like yellow color, right? So content is blue. The thing that is stretching across the center, right, stretching across the page, that is content. Right? My H1 is taking up the full horizontal space. Right? What did I just learn that I can do to make something not take up full horizontal space? What's that? Yeah. Display inline block, right? So you're going to find this stuff, right, in surprising places, right? Oh, this is taking up 100% of this place. I need to say my H1 is, we're going to say, well, display inline block, right? And now what I'm able to see is this stuff falls into order. I want you to see how little code this takes, right? Another one of the mistakes that people make when they go into CSS for Tweeter, right, is that you end up writing so much CSS that doesn't actually end up serving a purpose, right? I want you to see that like CSS can be made up of lots, or not lots, of some small commands. Okay? If all I want is two things to be displayed next to each other, I might say that this H1 should be displayed inline block. So I can go H1 display inline block. And now what I have is my stuff is displayed inline block. Now, maybe I want my login button all the way off to the right. And I can achieve this in a couple ways. One of the ways to do this would be using something like, let's talk about margin. Okay? Margin is how much space you want between one thing and another thing. Okay? So if I'm here and another person is next to me, margin is the space between me and that person. So I can say something like, hey, my button, maybe I will give it a margin, and I can give it specifically a left margin if I want to. I can give it a margin left of 200 pixels. And now when my thing is displayed, my login will be shifted over by 200 pixels because it says, hey, and see how this is orange, I want 200 pixels on the right between me and whatever my sibling is. And I could fuzz around with this number here. I could go, okay, let's try 500 pixels. That's too much. Let me try 350. Oops. 350. Right? And eventually I find a number that I like. Right? Yeah? That's totally, you totally could, absolute and like relative size. We're gonna hop into something similar to that. When you see that right now, since I've hard coded this as a 350 pixel margin, as I move in, my login falls off the page. Right? It falls off. So evidently, like I don't want to hard code values like that. Right? I might want to decide some way to have my button display itself on the right. There are a million different ways to do this, right? 1.5 million, right? Every day somebody comes up with a new way to do this. I'm going to show you one. I'm going to say this is not my favorite way to do it, right? But it'll get the job done. It's going to be that I will say, instead of margin, I will say float. And I'll be able to say that I want my this particular component, like my button, I want it to float to the right. Right? It's as if somebody had magnetized it and it just kind of goes whoop, and it sticks to the wall on the right. When I refresh my page right now, I'll see that my login has floated off to the right. Right? And as I move my thing, that goes off to the right as well. Do we run into some issues here? Yeah, so evidently, like, when I've done this floating off to the right, my content is now not necessarily part of the navigation in terms of flow anymore. Right? It's not part of the the content there. So it kind of sticks out and everything else is just like bleeding underneath. There are ways to fix this. I'm gonna immediately get this wrong. Let me say if I go to like main and I do something like, there is a command or a rule called clear. Basically, as soon as you said float, it messes up your entire page until where you say clear. So if I say clear both, this may or may not work right now. I'll explain what this does in a second. It didn't work. So float is, I find, an infinitely kind of confusing way of thinking about layout on your page. As soon as you say that something's like floating off to the side, like I said, it breaks the flow of your page. And there's very hacky ways of like hacking your page back into flowing correctly. I'm not going to focus on that, but instead I would recommend maybe taking a look, if you really want to learn about it, taking a look at, I know Travis's lecture from a month ago covers float and clear. What I'm going to do instead is I'm going to focus on a thing called flex. All right, I'm going to focus on a thing called flexbox instead, which is going to be a different solution for displaying things separate from each other, or like displaying layout. Some people will tell you that flex is advanced. It's not. Flex has like maybe 2 or 3 things that you need to know. And as soon as you kind of learn flex, you'll be able to see where you can use this stuff in places. So I'm going to get rid of this float stuff. We're going to pretend I never did that. Right? What I'm going to do instead is I'm going to take a look at the fact that these are 2 items that live within a container. There are 2 items that live within a container. And I can decide to give this container a particular property. I'm going to tell this container to display itself using flex. So I'm going to say that the container itself, so the container would be the nav in this case. The container itself, so the nav, I'm going to say it displays with flex. I'm going to save and I'm going to refresh. I'm going to see that almost nothing changed. One thing that changed is that the H1 is now not vertically aligned anymore. And you go, what? That's not what I meant to do. Maybe we'll just kind of deal with it. You're going to notice that sometimes you'll include a certain rule and it'll mess everything up, right? And your flow for working with CSS, in my opinion, should be to go into the inspector, take a look at the rules that are associated with the components that you're working with, and just toggle them on or off. And just see if, like, what is the culprit for what's going on there, right? So evidently here it's my display flex that I brought in. I might have ended up with like 100 lines of CSS. I would just go through and try to toggle things on and off and find out, does this line even do anything? And maybe get rid of the lines of code that seem like they're useless. So we'll talk about the vertical alignment later. What I can do once I've said to display something as flex is I can then give rules saying, what does flex mean? Flex is going to say that I can choose how the elements within a component or within a container are displayed. Are they displayed in a row or are they displayed in a column? I can do that with a property that says flex direction, and then I could go row. Right? Cool, they're displayed in a row, so apparently nothing has changed. Right? I could go row dash reverse. What? And I save this, and when I refresh, it has reversed itself. All right, wild. Right? All of a sudden, CSS starts seeming a little bit more exciting. Right? Here's one, flex direction column. Right? Flex direction column, when I refresh this now, my things are displayed one on top of the other. And I can play around with these rules a little bit, and eventually I'll say, okay, you know what? I am happy with the fact that they're displayed in a row. That's okay, because I want them to be next to each other, but I want them to be separate. Specifically, the justification of my components. Right? My items should be justified such that there is the maximum amount of space between them. And so I go, hey, you know what? Let's justify this content, right, such that there is space between them. And I go here and I refresh, and all of a sudden now these components are displayed on the page, right, with as much space between them as possible. And as I squish this, sure, they'll come together, right? But they're still going to try and keep as much space between them as they can. Right? What's curious about this is I can add more stuff in the middle here. Let me add just another button. Woo! Another button. And I have said that these things inside of the nav should be displayed with as much space between them as possible. So I go here, I refresh, and now one of them is in the middle. Okay, so Flex is going to do that job of figuring out how to display that stuff. All I got to do is say, display it with the space between. Right? Now, this may not seem groundbreaking, but I will say that like doing layout before Flexbox was a thing was a huge pain. Right? Not a fun time. Right? I would recommend, as you're looking at your tweeter, explore ways in which you can use Flex to display things next to each other. Right? And we're going to do that as we go forward into building this last little bit here. Right? Yes. Right. So the question for Victoria was, how do you decide between going with Flexbox or with Grid? That's a great question. I think this is going to come from a personal place. For me, I go by what I'm comfortable with. Right? I have played around with Grid. I have found that like it just requires a bit more work than I'm willing to put in for simple stuff. So we're not going to talk about Grid today, but if you want, you can look up CSS Grid. It's just a different method for laying stuff out. And as a personal preference, I just think it requires too much code. Right? But what you do find is that if you try doing really complicated layouts, right, doing them with Flexbox becomes a little bit overwhelming, where like Grid and the features that Grid has suddenly come through to shine. Right? So I guess as a rule of thumb, I'll go like, does this seem like a pretty simple thing to do with Flex? If yes, I'll do it with Flex. If not, then I'll consider taking a look at how to do it with Grid. Yeah, I know it's a bit more of a nebulous answer than maybe you would have wanted, but yeah. So I'm gonna get rid of that H1. What was it? The button. We're just back in this page again. Whoops, of this set, and I'm fairly happy with it. Now, what I want to do is maybe start working on my articles and my information about Reddit, and I'm running into very much of a similar situation. I need these two things displayed next to each other. And so I take a look at my articles, I take a look at my aside, and these things live within a main. So I might write the exact same rule. I might say, okay, main, right? My main, it displays Flex, right? Flex, and now when I go here, I have my articles and my information about Reddit are separate, and then I can say things like, let's justify our content by space between, and now they're spread apart as well. And I might want to have like a bit of like a gutter space on the sides. You know, when I look at Reddit, like the stuff actually has quite a bit of negative space. So I can go ahead and I can say, okay, well, whoever it is that contains these two things can have some gutter space. Right? That becomes a complicated question, because who contains these two things? Well, if I look at the HTML, this div and this aside are contained by a main. So I could tell the main to have some gutter space. But then the main itself is also contained by something else. It's the body. So I might tell the body, oh, like it should have some gutter space, right? And then I think, okay, well, that gutter space then is going to affect the nav and yada yada. Well, you see that I'm doing this idea of going up and down this chain of nested elements, right? Because the nesting of elements is going to be crucial to the way that styling works in CSS. There is an idea of inheritance. You might have noticed really early on when I said that, like, remember how my Reddit here is green? I applied the green style over to the nav. I applied it to the nav. But everything inside of the nav, so the H1 and ideally also the button, they inherit those styles. Unless they overwrite the style, they will inherit what their parent gave them. Right? So my H1 right now, it doesn't overwrite or override the green that it gets from the nav. But I could, if I wanted to, say, okay, well, my H1 down here, it'll also have the color purple. It'll have the color purple. When I refresh this right now, it has the color purple, even though it should have inherited the color green from the nav. Right? And it starts becoming a little bit of a race for you to try and figure out, okay, this particular element here, what style are they going to get? Right? What style are they going to get? There are specific rules of what we're going to call specificity that play into the way that elements are going to choose what CSS they will render themselves with or not. Right? So we will look up the CSS specificity calculator. Right? CSS specificity. I'll put this into the notes. What I'm trying to find here is this right here. So there are different ways for me to identify a particular element. Right? One particular way for me to write some CSS that touches an element is to say that element's name. Right? Say the name, and I'm doing that here. I'm saying span or H1. I'm doing that. But if I have multiple elements with the same name, such as, I'm not seeing any here right now, but we'll do one here. We'll say that my div is going to have an article. This is article 1. And it's also going to have an article 2. If these two things have the same name and I want to style them differently, I'm going to have a hard time. Because if I go ahead and I just say article, and I say, okay, well, the article of one might have the background pink, right? And I want the article of the other one to have the background red, maybe. Right? This code here is not going to work at the moment because I'm not able to identify one article over another. Right? I need to use maybe something like a class or an ID. Right? Those are things that are built into HTML that let us give some extra meaning to particular tags. So I can say, okay, well, instead of article, I might say, okay, how about the article with the class special is going to have the background red, but every other article is going to have the background pink. And now, if I have an article with the class special, right? This CSS selector is more specific than this CSS selector here. I'm going to see that one of them is going to be pink and the other one's going to be red. And I'm going to put in a bunch of articles here in my HTML. We're just going to go article. There we go. Bunch of articles. But only that one is red. And there is a calculation that you can use to see which rule will be applied. And the calculation goes like this. We can take a look at how many element selectors are being used in that rule. And we can count that. We can look at how many class or attribute selectors. So we're just going to talk about class selectors today. How many class selectors are being used? And we'll count those up. Oops. How many IDs, and also how many particular inline style attributes are being used. Right? Or are there inline style attributes? So I'll take a look at my current CSS here. This article, it has one element selection. This one here has one element selection and one class selection. And what the calculation lets us do is we take the particular numbers which go, we'll just do the last three here, 0, 0, 1, right? This one's going to turn into 0, 0, 1 because it has 0 IDs, 0 classes, and 1 element. Whereas this one here has 0, 1, 1. because it has 0 IDs, 1 class, and 1 element. Here's a fun question. Is the number 11 bigger than the number 1? Julia, is the number 11 bigger than the number 1? Okay, thanks. Oh man, I thought we were going to have to roll back a couple years. So the number 11 is bigger than the number 1. So we're saying that this particular selector is more specific, and it will override what we're seeing here, right? Or any of the rules that are here that are repeats of the rules in here, those are going to take precedence. Okay. If I had some things in here, such as the font size of this one is 25 pixels, I'm going to find that the 25 pixels part, like that's going to be present in both. Both are going to have 25 pixels, but the parts that overlap, the more specific one is going to take precedence. Again, you can get really complicated with this stuff. You totally can. But I wouldn't suggest it. There's no reason to unless you really enjoy it. Right? You can take this week, right, to see if the initial parts of CSS are interesting to you. And if they are, then I've got good news for you. There's tons of stuff that you can learn in there. Right? But if you're finding it pretty boring, then you might as well skip it. Right? Now, this here, very, very similar to our Reddit homepage. Yeah, obviously not 100% there, but I want you to see that layout-wise, and that's what I'm talking about right now. Layout-wise, we can totally get there. We can totally get there by following these steps, right? If we wanted to, and I'm going to keep you for like genuinely 2 more minutes. If we wanted to go into making this stuff pretty, my recommendation for you to figure out how to make things look nice is to look at css.cool. It's a real website. css.cool is the world's premier source for learning CSS. Here it is. css.cool. Nima approved. You want to learn how to do borders? Here's some border styles. You can add a dotted border. And it'll tell you how to do that. Border, and then here are some properties, and then feel free to change those properties. Right? You want to do some font styles, right? You can have italic fonts and normal fonts. Box shadows. You want to throw some shadows on that thing? Let's do it. Let's throw some shadows on it right at the end. We'll do this box shadow here, the 0, 0, 5 pixels, 2 pixels magenta, which should give us this. I'm going to say that every article is going to have that box shadow. And now as I look at my page, every article has that box shadow. What? Hacker, right? She adds some more stuff in here. I'm going to do that every article is going to have the height 250 pixels, just so that they all... I'm zoomed in like quite a bit. Okay, so maybe 250 pixels would work if I wasn't zoomed in so much, but since I am zoomed in a ton, we're going to say 50 pixels for height. Cool. And then we're going to say 2 last things that I want you to explore. One of them is I'm going to say that the margin is 10 pixels. Boop. Margin is 10 pixels. I'm going to do one more. Padding. This one's going to be 15 pixels. Ho ho. Get the heck out of here. What? What? It put space on the inside? Okay. Let me lead with this question here. Garrett, you. What is the difference between this square here, or this rectangle here, and this rectangle here? Yeah. There's more elbow room? What else? Is it the same height as it used to be? It's not the same height that it used to be, which is annoying, because I said it was supposed to be 50 pixels. And I look at this and I say, why aren't you 50 pixels? Why can't you just be normal? Right? Like I said you should be 50 pixels. And then I add in some padding, you're not 50 pixels anymore. This is stupid. Right? It's stupid. No, it's dumb. Because the thing is, CSS by default, your browser by default, it's going to interpret padding and margin as like extra things. So if you say that something has a particular height and then you add some margin, it'll mess up the height. So now if I wanted this to be 50 pixels, I have to go 10, 15. 10 plus 15 is 25. So then my height needs to be 25. So that I can get to a nice 50 pixels. Or sort of. Yeah, kind of. The point is I'm doing math, and I did the math wrong too, right? Is that why you put your hand up? Yeah? So if I change the height to a percentage, so we're just going to say make my height maybe a 10%. We're going to see what 10% is without padding. Right? That's what it is right now, and as soon as I add padding on it, it messes it up again, right? Here's what you're going to have to do. We're going to have to say for our particular things, border box. Wait. Oh, no. Shoot, what's the word? Box sizing. There you go. Box sizing. You see how I depend on autocomplete? Box sizing, border box. Right? And what that's going to let us do is deal with heights in a non-dumb way. Like, it's going to work the way you intend it to. That's all I want to say right now, is just in any component where you put in stuff like height, just also put in box sizing, border box. I'll put in a link to an article that you can read about it. It's not very important that you understand it. It's just more important that you do it, right? Makes sense? Cool. Let me throw you one last one. Border radius, 25 pixels. It's gonna make you a real designer. Whoa! And yeah. So, not an overwhelming kind of demo in terms of like our final visual output, but I want you to see that CSS is built up of adding little things to it. Right? Are there any kind of burning questions that you want to ask right now? Cool. Jake has some questions, which is nice. Cool. And Victoria, could you just give me a no if you have no questions, and then I'll let you go? Oh, Emily and Graham says no. Cool. Graham is typing. And Graham doesn't type. Sweet. So you are free to go. Notes will be out real soon. Do cross-reference this with other lectures, because I've covered some stuff that other lectures haven't covered, and other lectures cover stuff that I didn't cover, just to choose. So just do a little bit of cross-referencing. Have a great day. Oh, so sweet. Wow. Y'all aren't jaded yet? That's great. Have a great day, Victoria. Bye.